I've been listening to Dennis Prager's lectures on the Torah. He taught it verse by verse over 18 years from 1992 to 2010. So his 11th lecture on Deuteronomy, delivered back in 2003, he makes the point that when people say Jews, everybody goes, oh, 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 excuse me, I have no opinions on Jews. Nobody yawns, nobody gets bored. So Dennis is teaching from chapter 6 of Deuteronomy, which verse 20, it says, if your child asks you tomorrow, what are the testimonies and the decrees and the ordinances that the Lord our God commanded you? Dennis Prager points out, asking questions is a Jewish mentality. At Yeshiva we were taught to ask questions. Often the rabbis didn't have the answers. But he says, our friends who grew up in other faiths, they were not encouraged to ask questions. Torah doesn't say if your children ask you questions, just tell them, just do it, just shut up and do it. No, it says that we keep these because God brought us out of Egypt. Kind of an interesting answer, but anyway, the Torah does have reasons for why we should keep its laws. Moses is instructing every generation that will ever live how to answer your child. How come we keep kosher? How come we keep Shabbos? Because God took us out of Egypt. God took us out of Egypt for a purpose, to be a good and to be a holy people. Dennis notes as he reads aloud different translations of the Torah that modern liberal Jewish commentators don't like the word fear. So when they translate the Torah, they use reverence or awe. The Orthodox, when they translate the Torah, they use fear. Christians, they use fear. The Hebrew word in the Torah for fear means fear. It doesn't mean awe, reverence. It doesn't mean scared. If God created the world and he will judge you, he's worth fearing. And Dennis says it's okay for your children to ask you questions. The Torah assumes your children will ask you questions. Notice it doesn't say keep quiet and do them. This sets a tone. Parents, you owe your children explanations. So many parents think you just tell your kids to do it. The Torah says give your kids a reason. Over thousands of years, Judaism has forgotten to give rational reasons for its laws. When people do something over and over, it becomes a tradition. Dennis Prager notes the Hebrew word for tradition, minhag, spelled backwards, is Gehenna. Hebrew word for hell. Then he raises another interesting point. If you keep the commandments, have you achieved righteousness just by keeping God's commandments? Jewish view is yes. Christian view is no, that's not enough. You have to get right with God and then do the commandments, and then you become righteous. So law becoming an end in itself is becoming a problem in modern society outside of Judaism. Dennis Prager knows he had a big international law professor hang up on him on the radio just before the war in Iraq. He was inveighing how horrible the war was, how it was against international law. Dennis asked him if the UN Security Council voted for it, would it then be illegal? The professor didn't want to answer it and ended up hanging up. So just because some people vote on something, that makes it legal, but it doesn't make it moral. It was legal to kill every Jew in Germany. Legal is just what people vote on. It may not be moral. Then there's a fascinating point. Whenever God speaks about what happens to the Canaanites, the people in the land of Canaan, that the Israelites coming out of Egypt to take possession of that land, God never talks about committing genocide. God only talks about expelling the Canaanites, chasing them out of the land, never about destroying them. This is repeated several times in the book of Exodus. Moses, however, talks about committing genocide, wiping them out, using the language at his disposal. He's so angry at the practices of the Canaanites. Remember at Baal Peor, near the end of Numbers, the end of the Torah portion of Bilam, the Midianite women tempted the Jewish men into immorality and idolatry, and Moses was just kind of standing back and not doing anything. And it was Pinchas who had to take action, and he took a pike and drove it right through these two couples, Zimri and this Midianite women who were fornicating in front of the congregation. So it's one thing to commit fornication here in the hovel in private. It's another thing to go in a shul, get under the Torah scrolls, commit fornication on top of Torah scrolls on a Shabbos morning in front of the whole congregation. That's really wicked. Don't do it. So the Bible itself says that genocide was never carried out against the Canaanites. It's a theoretical command from Moses. Torah never has people killed for bad belief, at least not non-Jews. God prescribes expulsion, not annihilation. Moses saw that the sexy Midianite women were getting the Jews into idolatry. That is what Moses is worried about. Deuteronomy prescribes the same treatment for any Israelite cities that lapse into idolatry. They must be wiped out. So if you hear people say the Hebrew Bible recommends genocide, it's not true. It is Moses being angry in his talk. It didn't happen, this genocide of the Canaanites. If it happened, it wasn't God's instructions. It really only happens once in the Torah, and that was the Midianites. So Moses is overreacting when he keeps telling them to destroy them, to devour them, to show them no pity. So when Moses retells the story, is that the word of God? The text doesn't say it's the word of God, it says it's the word of Moses. So when Abraham speaks to the king and says, Sarah's my sister, does that mean it's the word of God? No, it's the word of Abraham. You can believe the Torah is divine, but that doesn't mean that everything that Abraham or Moses or Aaron says is divine. Abraham does not look like a hero when he says Sarah is his sister. So if Moses says, this is what God said to me, then we're much closer, but it's still not God speaking. I don't know why that's not an Orthodox Jewish perspective. Do you believe that it's really identical to God speaking when it's Moses speaking? God handed down the text, that's the Orthodox Jewish position. But the text certainly has non-divine utterances. So the traditional commentators, I'm not sure if they make any distinction between what Moses is saying in Deuteronomy and what God is saying. The Torah says these are the words of Moses. You have to understand the distinction, Dennis Prager notes, between the words of Moses and the words of God. When Moses hits the rock and says, look at the rock and look at the water Aaron and I are getting for you rebels, those God's words? Obviously not. God says you can't get into the Holy Land because you said that. You have to understand that this is a human speaking here. The divine seal of approval is on the authenticity of what he said, not necessarily on the morality or the correctness of what he said.